next piece that will be transmission for bassoon and electronics. We will now listen to the first section of the piece. I kindly recommend those of you listening with headphones take care of the volume. All right. So tell us, Franck, what was that?
Well, first, I would like to thank Nadav for his performance once again, because Nadav, when he plays, seems to be quite cool, but actually it's quite difficult to play. He seems to do it very naturally. So no, I had to mention that. About this very particular project for me, the piece has been composed before. The piece for ensemble, It, that we just heard. It was composed in 2002 at the IRCAM cursus. I think you know IRCAM is the place which is mixing research and music and trying to find connections, and many pieces are composed there. And at the time, I was doing this cursus for composition and technology. And the idea in the end of the year was to compose a piece for solo instruments and electronics, which is quite difficult to do actually, because when you do such a thing, the electronic part should be almost self-sufficient, or at least very interesting, and also the instrumental writing. And so it's in a way a duo that you're writing. It has to be well balanced, not one very rich and the other less interesting, you know. So that's a balance which needs to be designed very carefully. And I remember that I had to find, I thought, a kind of scenario for this piece, because I had work with the bassoon player, Brice Martin, who premiered the piece at IRCAM. And we were both students at the conservatoire at the time. And we started to work on the instrument, the bassoon. And I discovered that the bassoon has this kind of particular character, which is that it can be transformed quite easily and change its voice. It's quite unstable, possibly. Sometimes, without any electronic treatments, you can obtain something which is very vocal, very guttural, and sometimes with some techniques and speed, it sounds almost like an electric guitar sometimes, or it will sound like a sound synthesis. it's very strange, but I like very much this instability in the character of the bassoon. Of course, that's not something that you hear that much in the classical repertoire, but when you push a little bit the limits of the instruments, you realize that you can obtain a lot of surprising things. So I think for me, it's still it's a very symphonic instrument in its identity and its history, because there's not so much link of the bassoon with other cultures in terms of repertoire, let's say. But in the meantime, its identity is very flexible. And that's very interesting for someone like me, who writes a lot of about transformation and play with the identity and ambiguities. So actually, there was something which attracted me a lot. I worked a lot in order to find some techniques that would possibly help me obtaining the colors that I wanted. And I had in mind this kind of unstable character because I thought there was a dramatic potential of the instrument, and I still believe it's the case. So when I arrived at IRCAM, I thought that if I had to do a piece with electronics, that would be interesting to put face to face. So this instrument, which is very symphonic in its history, has no particular link with electronics. And the electronics, which can be apparently very foreign to the bassoon. But in the meantime, you realize that you can transform the bassoon so that it sounds a bit electronic. And of course, it's a part of the work of a composer, I think, with mixed pieces to, let's say, instrumentalize and make it rhythmically interesting, the electronic part. So the idea, the conception behind was that I had to put the bassoon in a bath of acid electronics, let's say, and like a kind of chemical reaction, that there would be a kind of wrestling, yes, kind of struggle between both of them, and that a drama would occur because they can resemble sometimes each other, that's the way, but most of the time they are kind of antinomic in a way. So I thought that the contrast was quite interesting, and that's what I wanted to do. Yeah.
Yes, I can say from my side, I have already some history with this piece. The first time I performed it, it was in the Ensemble Modern Academy, almost 10 years ago. And I remember that Johannes Schwarz, the bassoon player of Ensemble Modern, he gave me this piece. He said that it's a good piece to open the horizon, to open the mind. And as you said, usually pieces for bassoon, even composers today not always know how to deal with this instrument. Usually the polite people sitting at the back row of the orchestra. And when I learned this piece, and so savage and wild, and I would never imagine those things can came up from the bassoon. And as you said, it's a piece about the struggle. Actually, it's very dramatic. You can almost invent a story of some kind of science fiction, fantasy, or so you can even imagine a plot for it. And I think it makes it, on one side, it's very acid, as you said. On the other side, it's actually very communicative and clear for the listener because of the structure. I think this is one of the advantages of this piece. And you spoke about the combination between an instrument and the machine. I think it's something very fundamental for this piece, for the performance, because when you perform it, I can say for myself, then on one hand you must be almost out of control. With those passages, we will see the score in a minute. You will see that some of them are almost unplayable, some of them are really unplayable. And I think I wanted to ask you in this opportunity if you had in mind this psychological stress to put on the performer that will create this drama and energy. If if this was your part of your goal in order to create something special whenever this piece is performed.
Well, I think we should maybe think more precisely inside the score. And I don't know exactly what passage you have in mind, but if I can give a kind of general answer, obviously I'm playing with the limits. So when you're playing with the limits, all of them for each of the features that I'm shaping, let's say, all the sound actions that I'm shaping, some of the limits are okay sometimes, and some in some it depends of the instrument, depends of the circumstances, or all of kind of things, I guess. So if you want, I think that obviously playing with the limits is a part of the game here. And it's true that when a composer tries to do that, some things can happen really at the border of the playable, and it creates a kind of I would say a kind of uncertainty about what is the most important to save when you have this global stress. One thing which is important to say is that and maybe it's linked to your impression, Nadav, is that a lot of things have to do with speed, once again, in this piece. And some things, you know, are more difficult to play than others, depending also of the speed that you're trying to reach. And the thing is, for me, there is something crucial, is that the speed is creating timbre. For instance, when you're playing a fast tremolo between with a very large interval at the bassoon, if you play it slowly, you would remain with a kind of traditional, say, rather traditional sound. And maybe, by the way, you can give an example, if you don't mind, Nadav, just putting a very large trill for between the B flat and the E, for instance, and play it slowly and then very fast, and you will see that the timbre is changing. Here it is. For instance, if we didn't have the right speed, and we wouldn't have the right timbre. So the fact is that yes, speed is a part of my music, and generally I try to exaggerate this fast action feature in the score, which can give the impression that I want something which is impossible. But the thing is, I'm very conscious that when you do you make your best, you will reach, by even if it's approximated, you will reach a certain sound action which will produce a certain timbre. So yes, generally sometimes are notated quite you know, in order to be achieved and played very fast, and you can find that it's almost impossible. But even if it's approximated, what I know, it gives something significant, I think. So yes, approximation should deliver something significant, and that's why I'm writing it like that.
Yeah, and another aspect of this uncertainty, if we look on the score again, we can see that there are some elements of improvisation inside the written music. We have all those. If we go a bit above, back to the first page. Yeah, so we see all those small lines. It's actually very short, very intense, short improvisations. And this is another challenge of this piece, that you have to do those unmeasured elements inside a very strict environment of a click track in the headphone. And this element of improvisation is taking over later in the piece. We will hear it soon. I think this is also creates this atmosphere that you were talking about. I just want to say for the composers that are listening, the effect that we were speaking about now, it is called a barrio tremolo. It is as the name applies, it's from the Berio sequenza for bassoon, and it is a trill of a tremolo between two notes in a wide interval of 2 octaves and more. This one, for example, it's 2 octaves and a half, and it's something very typical for the Berio sequenza, but also here in this piece. Maybe we can listen to another effect. You can see it here now. There was little dots, white and black. This is bisbignando. And this is also an effect used in this piece. It's trill, but not on the same pitch, but just the changes of timbre. So I will demonstrate it now.
Once again, maybe Nadav, you could play it slowly and then fast in order to see what is the transformation of timbre linked to that. Yeah, once again, it's part of the articulations of sound from within, let's say, which distorts, or let's say change radically sometimes the impression we have of the instrument. So yes, the idea that speed can possibly distort the sound is important for me.
Yeah, there is also those distorted notes, those low notes in the low register with overblow. Once again, careful with the headphones. All those effects also give this impression of, as you said, of influence from an electric guitar of some kind. And I think we can listen now for another section from the piece.
Maybe one thing I could say, and Nadav, if you don't mind, especially about the kind of lightning signs where you have one note and after that you arrive to a grace note and things like that around measure 20. I don't see here very well. 21, I think. Yes, 21, measure 21. You have one, yes, this thing can. Actually, no, a bit, yes, 21. We have here apparently something improvised, but the thing is, and I think Nadav will confirm, it's so fast that you don't have any choice, actually. It's kind of fake improvisation because the idea is to go from the note which is written to the G, go back and forth and try to have the whole register, or let's say, and it goes so fast that in the end, we don't hear the pitches that much, but we hear a phenomenon, a globality. And that's why I'm writing sometimes in a kind of improvised way, because even if I was writing the pitches, it wouldn't make any changes to the impression that we obtain. So why bothering the instrumentalists with things that are very precise if you only think about the globality? There's no point for me. So in this piece, and generally it's linked to speed, once again, when I write those kind of signs, it's because I know that within the time which is taken for at this tempo, Nadav and other bassoon players will not have the time to do something else than what I want. So I think for me it's perfect to write it like that, because I think there is no margin of approximation that would betray the initial idea. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's hear a bit more from the piece. Okay, we have to. I'm sorry to interrupt myself, but we have to go on. You know, you spoke about this feeling of trance in the previous piece. I think it's also very relevant for this piece as well, and especially in a live performance. I remember in the rehearsals in Tel Aviv that you wanted always the speakers to be louder and louder.
Yes, yes, I try my best to obtain the, the very
So
high level.
you have this energy, and also as we saw a little bit, and we will see in the next example as well, there's some simple effects of light that also adds to the drama in this piece.
Yes, and you see, there is something maybe we didn't speak enough about, or at least just to be mentioned, is the physical aspect of this piece should be felt by the audience. It should be projected in a way which is very direct. And I think it's not something very common in, let's say, classical music, maybe sometimes with orchestra, even in the repertoire of the 19th century in Romantic music. But this physical aspect of the expression, I wanted it to be quite strong. And it's true that it can lead to a pleasure which is quite violent, let's be honest. And in the meantime, I like it very much. So I don't see why I should prevent myself from doing that. That was the reason why I felt sometimes that the volume was not maybe high enough, and I wanted more. So it's true that the electricity modified, I think, historically, the relationship we have with musical pleasure. It's not the same anymore. And I think this aspect influenced me a lot when I am writing still. I think I'm still looking for this electric pleasure I was sometimes talking about. So yes, it's part of the volume is a part of the expression, I think. Yeah.
Okay, we will now listen and watch the end of the piece. If I didn't mention before, this is from a concert in our previous SEM festival when you were our guest in Tel Aviv last year, and we will hear that after the climax, when there is this special moment where you have the effect of amplification of the air going through the bassoon. And maybe you can see it, it's very small. There is a microphone on the bell of the bassoon, and it amplifies the air sound with reverb. And this is, as you said, it's something very physical for the audience to feel that the room is filled with this kind of effect. Let's hear it. Yes, so this was a transmission by our guest today, Franck Bedrossian. I would like to show you the last page of the score. You can see here very clearly the combination between the written pitches and the improvisational lines. And all those places must be very accurate because there is an effect, an electronic effect exactly on this moment.
Yes, there is synchronization of the rhythm of the electronics, which seems to hit the bassoon and try to change it and prevent it of running, actually. And it's the electronics tries to interrupt the run and the escape of the bassoon and does not really manage. So yes, that's a part where the liberation of the instrument and of the bassoon is also linked to the to this will of escaping, I think. So he escapes rhythmically. Yeah.
Okay.